Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we are going to take a look at what's new in Fusion for April of 2026. Honestly, I'm getting tired of making these videos. Software just changes so frequently. I feel like we've just got a somewhat big update recently, but there is a lot in the update that happened today, so I think it's worth that we talk about it. If you haven't seen any of our update videos before, we're not going to cover everything, but you can always go up to your help menu, go to what's new, see the release notes, see what's changed. I'll also leave a link to the blog post in the description of the video. What I'm going to cover is going to be the ones that I feel are the most important changes, even if they seem minor. And I'll also cover some of the most annoying ones. Now, I'm currently getting over a cold or something, so I am going to cut the camera off because I'll probably have to pause to sneeze or cough quite a bit. But I'm going to do my best to get through this video because the update did just happen today or last night. And so there's probably a lot of confused people with some of the tools and changes that have happened because like in typical fashion, some buttons have moved, some new buttons have shown up. And depending or not if you're on a CE hub, so the collaborative editing hub, you will or will not see some of this stuff depending on if you're a hobby or an EDU user. Some of the changes are only for commercial licenses, and I'll get to talking about all that. I will also put chapters in the description of the video, so if you're looking for a specific feature and we are covering it, then double check the chapters and we'll take a look. But first things first, the Fusion startup experience. This is probably one of the things that annoys me the most. Fusion is really pushing the use of the Home tab, and this is the default startup experience. There is a user preference setting that does allow you to control this, and so the startup experience, if you haven't changed this from to the default design type, the home experience was pushed a couple of updates ago. So the default design type is what I keep mine on. I don't like using the home tab experience. I haven't ever since it's been introduced. It has been improving and getting better. I think there is still some merit to it, but there are also some problems, and I'll go over those problems. So the way that it works now is if you close out your last design, even if you have set it up to use the default design experience, if you close out your last design, it goes directly into the home tab experience. Now, this is annoying for a couple of reasons. If you don't want to use the home experience, then this is annoying because it's now here and it's persistent. The second thing is you cannot open the data panel unless you have a design open. So the fact that we no longer have just a blank untitled design prevents us from opening the data panel, which means that you need to open a design. In this case, you would need to open up one of these, which happens just by clicking on it, and then you can open up the data panel. And so, again, this is kind of annoying because I don't want to use the home tab experience. I like the data panel. It works for me. I see the thumbnails of all the things I need. I can drag them into a design. I can right click, share them, get properties. I can expand this and see information about all the components. We recently did a video on what the CE hub is because all the hubs are transitioning to that. And so if you're not on a CE hub or you haven't seen that video, then you'll notice that you don't see versions anymore underneath here. You have to actually go into history to see that stuff. I suggest if you want to know more about it, you check out that video. I'll make sure that we link to that so you can see it. But again, as soon as we close out the last design, you're stuck in this home tab experience. Now, if you want to view properties, what you need to do is actually click on this box here. But if you select it, what ends up happening is it opens it. I don't think that this is a good user experience. That's just kind of annoying to me. The second problem is they put the home tab button. It used to be over here directly next to undo, redo. They put it right where the data panel button used to be. So all that muscle memory for expanding the data panel and collapsing it, it's now the location where the home button is. And that annoys me in every software that I use. It could be, things like QuickBooks Online, for example. They put their AI chat exactly where your user avatar used to be, where you would go to log out. Anytime a software company does this and kind of messes with the muscle memory of where buttons were, that is a big problem because it forces you to accidentally, or it has you accidentally click on things that maybe you don't want to use. So I don't really like that experience. I wish that they would not have moved the home button. It was here. There's no problem with it being where it was. I don't know why it has to be there. I hope this doesn't mean at some point we're going to lose the data panel. I don't really know if that's possible or not. But personally, I don't like the home experience and I prefer the data panel. That's not for everybody. I'm glad that we have options, but I don't see this as a good experience, a good way to go. All right, so update number 2, or the thing that we're going to talk about second, is smoother, faster fusion. For a year or more, there has been updates. Every time there's an update, we get reports that Fusion is faster, Fusion is smoother, there's more performance, things open quicker, the data panel opens quicker, the home tab opens quicker. I historically have not seen that or have not found that to be the case. There are some exceptions, but historically I haven't seen the performance gains that have been claimed. Now, I will say that there are some instances, for example, with the CE hub, a lot of the properties are going to be offloaded and independent of the design. They're linked to the design, but that means things like changing part numbers and descriptions and things like that don't trigger rebuilds. There are also efforts made to pull out the sort of having to rebuild everything in a design. I believe it's focused more on external designs like we have here. It's not really focused on internal designs. Just a quick point, this engine is part of our assembly course on learneverythingaboutdesign.com. We did update that this year for intent-driven design, so we have it as a hybrid assembly with everything internal. We also have it as independent parts that you put together. So if you're interested in this and you want to play around with it, that is part of that course. And so I'll leave a link to our website there as well. So if you are seeing improvements in Fusion, I think that's great. I think that they're very use case specific, and historically the things that hang up for me still hang up. The browser turns black, and it's thinking when I'm trying to calculate complex fillets or rebuild certain features. Those are the things that really hang me up. It's not calculating patterns in an assembly that's a problem for me. But those are the areas where we are seeing some performance improvements. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about while we're in here is going to be some improvements to bill of materials. Now, this is actually, again, this is for CE hubs only. So if you're not on a CE hub or collaborative editing hub yet, then you will not see this yet. If you don't know, if you go to click Save on a design and you still see the save dialog pop up, it asks you for a version description and milestone, then you're on the older style hub. If you don't see that dialog and you go into your data panel and you don't see version history under the design, then you're on the newer CE style hub. This can be a little confusing because even on the old hub, if you go on the web and you take a look, there is a CE option, even if you don't truly have a CE style hub. So it can be a little tricky, but the big giveaway for me is if you go to save and you see a save pop-up dialog, you're not on the new hub yet. But what's been added, a couple of things have been added, but what's been added here is called the Navigator. I don't know if that's going to be the name of it going forward. This is basically a bill of materials visual display. Now, there are a couple ways that we can configure this. So you can look at this vertically, you can look at it horizontally, and you can look at it radially. Now, this is interesting. I don't know why it floats around like this. This is a very sort of mind-mappy kind of interface. But what's kind of nice is when you click on it, it'll highlight the component. You can look at only things that are in a working state. If you're using the Manage extension, I don't know where it went, but let's try this again. Let's go ahead and close that. If you are working with the Manage extension and you have parts that are in a working state or a release state, then you can filter it by this. But again, it's sort of a visual breakdown of assemblies. Now, this is a pretty straightforward assembly where we've got the top level assembly and then individual components underneath it. But again, this is a nice way that you can kind of take a look at your designs in a different aspect. There are some settings that you can do. So for example, there is a mini map that you can show down here. You can also show tooltips, which can help identify the names a little bit easier than reading that if you don't have this thing like full screen. There is a toolbar that it can be shown at the top, and then you can show the view switcher. So if you want to turn some of that stuff off, you can. There's not a whole lot that you can do in here in terms of configuring that, but that is a nice to have thing. And I think that it is an improvement to just the BOM view, the bill of materials view. There have been a lot of updates and improvements going forward for bill of materials. Just looking at it in here and on the web, again, I mentioned that you could do things like you can enter descriptions and change properties and so on, because this stuff in the CE Style Hub is independent of the design, so it's not going to trigger a save or a rebuild, which means that you can actually update this stuff on the web if you're viewing the design in a web viewer. I'm not going to go deep into that. Again, this is very much more of a tool that you would see in a commercial setting, especially if you're collaborating with other users and you are on the newer CE Style Hub. People that are on a hobby license, EDU, this is probably not as big of an impact for you. So again, we're not going to dive deep into it, but if it's interesting to you, I do suggest reading up a bit more on it. All right, the next thing that we need to talk about is the Autodesk Assistant. Now, we've done a few videos on this. We did a video where we talked about not using AI if you're trying to learn to design. And also, I don't really like it in the tech preview for the modeling aspect. We talked about it. We showed some examples. We did a long video on that. If you want to see that, make sure that you check it out. We also just released a video on actually using the Autodesk Assistant to create scripts and add-ins. Now, I think that is a very good use case. It's definitely going to shake up the functionality of the App Store and buying or purchasing apps, but it's something to keep in mind that there are a couple of distinct use cases for the Autodesk Assistant. So one is a expanded help file. So this is basically gives you a little bit more context and help than just looking through the help file. I think it's a very good use case for it there. Second, which is what our last video was, using it to help understand and create scripts and add-ins. It is by far the best coder or LLM that I've used to try to create Fusion add-ins. And so I'm really impressed with it there. I think that it has a lot of promise, and I really think that's probably where the biggest benefit is going to be. The third use case is to actually have it interact with your models. There was an update this time for April 2026 that is included script execute. And so this is different than having it generate a script. And so our example where we walk through and let's see which one it was. The one where we went through on generating a plane or resizing a plane based on our selection. That was a use case where I just used the chat assistant. I had it generate the code, and we took the script, created an add-in or created a script inside of Fusion and saved that so we could reuse it over and over again. Now, I did get the question in that video, why don't you just have the Autodesk Assistant do it for you? Well, the main reason here is because if you create a script, if you create an add-in, a macro, whatever you want to call it, it does a single function or whatever it's programmed to do, and it's repeatable. The same thing happens every time you use it. If you tell the Autodesk Assistant to resize the selected plane based on the selected body, it might work fine, but you have that level of prompting that you have to ask it instead of just clicking a button and having it work. And so there is a level of repeatability that happens if you generate a script. For the update today, we now have what's called script execute, which is essentially the ability for the Autodesk Assistant to create the code like we've asked to here and run that code, but the code doesn't get saved. It's a one and done. So there may be instances where that works and that's beneficial to you. I still don't see a ton of value in that as a workflow. I think that if you're generating a tool, or if you're asking it to create something, then having it be repeatable and having a saved script do that. Do you need to have the tech preview turned on if you want it to run script execute, and it still does not have the ability to save that script inside of the scripts and add-ins. You would still need to come in, you would still need to create a new script or add-in, and you would need to copy the code and put it in there manually. It still does not have the ability to do that. And so for me, the functionality, it still makes more sense just to use the chat where you don't have to turn on tech preview, have it generate the code, and you simply save it into a script or an add-in. Now, the other addition that happened is the ability to, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, render an image for you. Now, this, to the best of my knowledge, is a commercial only option, and there is a limit of 20 images per month. I assume at some point in the future, I don't have any information on this, but I have to assume at some point in the future, there will be some sort of extension or token usage like there is for solving simulations or rendering on the cloud or rendering images on or animations on the cloud, things like that. Now, what this is actually doing is it's taking a screenshot of your image and it's generating an AI image based on that. I personally am not going to use this functionality. I think that it has merit. There's not a huge transparency on where the data is going. I have to assume, based on things that I've read, that it's likely going to an AWS server or Microsoft Azure server, and it's taking a screenshot of your design and then it's generating the image around it. If you want to use that, by all means, you have to turn on the tech preview to try it out. I don't think it's available for hobby licenses, and I'm not sure that it's available for EDU either. The note in the What's New document, basically it said that it is a commercial, let's see if it's in here. It basically said that it was a commercial option and that there is a limit to 20 images per month. And so it's somewhere in here. Commercial users receive 20 images per month. Based on the way that that note is read, that tells me that this is a commercial only option. So if you're an EDU user and you can do this, then go ahead and leave a note or let me know, leave a comment. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I would just assume based on the way that that note is written out that it is a commercial only option. So that's what's changed with the Autodesk Assistant. Again, I feel like that there is a lot of promise with the Autodesk Assistant for expanded help files. I think there's a lot of promise for it to help you understand, learn, or just create scripts and add-ins for yourself. I think that's going to have a big shakeup to anybody that's trying to create those in the App Store to sell them. Things like the 2D Voronoi generator were free for a long time, and now they're bundled in together. Something like that is probably easy enough for the assistant to generate for you rather than buying it. And I think that that's going to have an impact on those out there that are trying to generate some income from creating add-ins that are useful. Some add-ins that we have are created and managed by Autodesk. You see them all the time in things like the insert menu for doing things like inserting McMaster car hardware or inserting parts or other things like that. Those are add-ins that are created. Some are managed by Autodesk, some are managed by external vendors. So those are things that, there's going to be an impact there. All right. Next thing is configurations. And so with configurations, there are updates pretty much every time. Generally, it's the inclusion of new things that can be configured, whether it's surface tools, whether it's additional feature tools or fasteners or whatever the case. That is still the case. There are still updates to what you can configure and how you go about that. The big change is this configuration rules. I don't know why this is still popping up. That is real annoying. Multiple workflows disrupted. Oh, cool. That's why. Let's see what's going on. We'll check the health dashboard. Oh. So there is a all right, issue, unable to open or upload Inventor. Okay, I don't care about that. Let's clear all of these because it's getting real annoying. All right, back on track. So with configurations, the big change here is what's called configuration rules. If you are a SolidWorks user that has used DriveWorks, whether it's the free DriveWorks Lite or whatever, DriveWorks Express that's in the Pro and I think Premium licenses, or if you use the actual higher up DriveWorks, This is similar functionality. Not, it's not quite the same because there's a lot of other things DriveWorks does. But God, this is annoying. Why does it keep doing this? All right. So there's a lot of things that you can do with configuration rules. This, unfortunately, is a design extension only option. And so if you are using configurations and you want to use this sort of visual logic, you're out of luck unless you have the extension. You can still learn about it, and if you haven't used the extension before, there's usually a 14-day trial. But basically, there is a list of different rules and logics, and what you do is you can drag and drop these into your code, and you can have it basically interact with your model. So you can say things like, if the diameter of this circle is less than 10 millimeters, then the whole pattern is 3. If it's more than 10 millimeters, then the whole pattern is 4. And you can use these basically these rules and these logics that can help you determine which configuration to pick, how to suppress certain features, how to interact with certain models, and you can build all of these with this sort of block logic. This is a lot, where a lot of coding languages are going, these more visual sort of drag and drop logic modules rather than typing it. There are still ways to create configurations without using this, but this does open up a lot of logical operators that you otherwise couldn't do with just standard configurations. You could do some of this with user parameters and things like the if statement, but this is going to be a much easier option. So if you are using configurations, if you are configuring your designs, that may be something to look into, because that's a design feature that I think that the design extension, it actually makes it a bit more valuable. This job status thing is really annoying. I don't know why it's doing that. But these are the kinds of changes that we get with Fusion. All right. So that's configurations. The next thing that has come up, which I actually think is pretty cool, I'm going to start a new part design for this, is we now have the ability to pattern construction geometry. And I'll show you an example here. And so I'm going to just create a line, and on that line, I'm going to create a plane along path. I'm going to set it to 0. This is actually another change specifically with this. In the past, if you used a line, whether it's or a spline or a curve or whatever, the plane along path could only be between 0 and 1. Now we actually have the ability to keep extending before and after it. You still want to snap to 0 or snap to 1 if you're using that as your reference line, but this gives us the ability to actually go beyond those extents. I am getting real tired of this job status thing. All right, so if we're going to do, let's see, along a pattern along path, we now have this construction geometry option. We can select our path, and as we start to pull this out, you can see here we're going to go to 100 or 1.0. We can change the number of planes and say okay. Now the reason this is important is because in the past what you'd have to do is independently create planes along paths using some sort of mathematical operator, either a user parameter or something. Now we can come in and say, well, I decided I actually just want 4 planes here, and we'll say okay. There have been some changes and improvements to resizing planes. So you'll notice now it's got this like black bar on the corner. I don't think that really changes anything, but you don't have to grab the endpoint anymore. You can grab the side of it and drag it. So that does help a little bit. It still doesn't give us the ability to automatically resize the plane like the script that we looked at with the Autodesk Assistant that we created, but this does help you resize a little bit. The next thing that changed with construction planes is we have a new plane type called perpendicular plane. And so what you typically did in the past was you created a plane at an angle and you just typed in 90 degrees. Now we can actually set it based on U and V directions of the plane we created, or you can use a planar face, for example, and you can set it at a distance as well. So it can be based on the center of that, or you can offset it wherever you want. And so I think this is actually a really helpful option, because there have been tons of times when I've just created a plane at an angle and just set it at 90 degrees or set it at 0 relative to a construction entity. And so I think that those two changes, the ability to pattern construction geometry and the ability to create a plane, a perpendicular plane, just automatically at 90 degrees, I think those two are actually really helpful and something that I would use all the time. While we're talking about construction geometry, user coordinate systems, this is something that's been in preview for a while, but it is now just fully baked into the system. And so this is nice if you want to create your own coordinate system. It'll be under the construction geometry, and that helps you if you need another reference that is not the default origin. And so that's kind of a nice option. Again, it's been in there for a little while. It's kind of been a tech preview that you could have turned on, but now it is sort of a default. I've got it pinned to the toolbar. That is just because it was a preview feature. I don't know if it's going to be pinned to the toolbar for everybody or not. But again, it seems like the construction geometry, patterning of that, the new plane, perpendicular plane, these are all good options for us. The next thing I want to talk about is fastener stack analysis. So this is one that I felt came out of nowhere. I think that it has some merit. I want to see it expanded a bit and potentially be included in interference detection. And so I'll show you an example here. And so fastener stack analysis, I must be hungry. Fastener stack analysis should be able to take a look at whether or not you have enough thread engagement, and that's based on this advanced setting here. So this is a engagement detection distance. It's based on the diameter of the bolt, not on the thread pitch, I don't believe, which is typically how you would do it. So if you had like quarter 20, you would want 3+ threads engaged. And if you had a coarse thread or a finer thread, then that would change that engagement distance. And so right now it's just based on the diameter, this detection distance based on the diameter. But again, it's still something that we didn't have before. The other thing it's supposed to do is it's supposed to detect a mismatch in threads. I don't actually know if it does that or not because there's no indication that that's true. But in this case, there is a metric thread in the engine case, and there is a imperial or an inch thread for the hardware that I inserted. And so it shows that it's red, but it tells me in the analysis folder that it's based on the engagement rules. In reality, I think it's actually based on the fact that the thread pitch and the diameter and all that stuff is different. I don't know how it calculates that. Again, there's no indication in the dialogue as to exactly what the problem is. It just tells me that the geometry no longer fits due to changes to the target geometry. So it says that the thread size doesn't match. It says that the bolt is too long. But again, I don't exactly know if it's because it's actually looking at the thread pitch or not. I would like to know a bit more information on this. Maybe you could drill down and find some more. But right now, it tells you that it's mismatched, but it doesn't say like this bolt is a quarter 20 and you are trying to put it in a 6mm hole. The threads are mismatched. The other thing that I would like to see is improvements with interference detection. And so the reason for this is I think that these two tools could work well together. And so if you take a look and compute interference here, obviously why did these dialogues are getting real annoying? Obviously, if you have a hole that is defined with cosmetic threads, the diameter is going to be smaller than a physical bolt. And so there will be interference detected there. What I would like to see is the ability for it to have interference detection for things like the head of fasteners. And so in this case here, if I go to, let's go back to the solid tools, fastener stack analysis. It says this one is fine, but if we take a look, in reality, we've got two bosses. The size of the hole in the bottom one is much smaller than the fastener. The fastener doesn't actually fit in this hole. And so these were all generated using the design extension, using the boss, which inserted the fasteners automatically. And these are obviously wrong. The screw has interference with the plastic counterbore. The thread is not even engaging in the hole, and the diameters are wrong. But here it says it's fine. And so again, I think that there is just some general things that still need tweaking to make this work. This one says it's fine. It's obviously not. The other one says that it's wrong, which is true, but I don't exactly know how it's calculating that because it should say both of these are wrong and it just says one is. So I would love to see more with this tool, potentially the incorporation of the interference detection for things like heads inside of counterbores. If it could figure that out at the same time as issues or mismatches with things like thread length, that would be perfect and it would really help with that tool. All right, next up on our list is Mesh Repair One Touch Fix. And so this is a new addition to the repair. Under repair type, we've got One Touch Fix. We've talked about the repair tools before. There have been some stuff that has gotten added to here. Essentially, One Touch Fix is going to analyze and average the geometry when it's trying to fix a mesh. There is a quick analysis. Like, for example, it tells us the mesh isn't closed. It tells me that we've got open boundaries. There are some thresholds that you can increase for things like the shell threshold, and we can play around with the opacity. But essentially, what happens with this one-touch fix, it's going to go through and it's going to try to repair your mesh body. I think that this has somewhat narrow use case. So in this case, it fixed a lot of holes that were around the side of the part. And it was able to basically clean up some of those boundaries. This is by no means a replacement for good clean scan data and good mesh processing in your scan tool. However, there is some merit here. It does have the ability to clean up some geometry. So for example, we go back before this, you can see all these little holes in these corners around the side of the part. Those are areas that were hard to scan or hard to get geometry because they were obscured. So for example, scanning that face, this little piece right here was obscuring the depth camera, but it does a fairly good job of cleaning those up. Now, again, it's not going to make up for missing data or a bad boundary or things like that, but it can help fix some potential problems if you had marker dots that weren't removed properly or if you missed a couple of areas because scanner access was poor. So it is a tool that can help with some of that. But again, it's not a magic button. It's not a one-touch fix-all. The other thing I want to talk about, or the next thing, is sheet metal. Now, sheet metal historically has been lacking functionality relative to, say, Inventor. But anytime we get new tools or new functionality, I'm never going to look a gift horse in the mouth. And so what we have now is something called corner closure. This is a feature or functionality that manually was a pain to do. Now we can come in, we can override the bend defaults. So for example, we can do a round corner relief. And this is something that I think actually is a really good addition because to do this manually was a pain. And so now having this corner closure as an option, we can do this relatively quickly. I wish it would save the defaults. That's something that when you have a design extension, that does end up kind of allowing you to save defaults in some dialogues. I don't know if it works here, but again, this is something that is a much needed option in sheet metal. I don't know at what point we're going to get all the sheet metal tools from Inventor or if it'll ever be fully featured, but anytime we get something new, is definitely an improvement. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is rendering. This is an area where I feel like it doesn't really need the attention. So we now have some extra options for saving a default scene setup. So if you change the environment, you change the background, you change the lighting, you change some of these settings, you can save that as a default. You can restore to your save default if you make changes, and you can go back to the Fusion default if you want to. While I think that's nice, where I would love to really see some improvement is in the ability to save a template. And so as we go more to this intent-driven design, what I would love to see here is some templates, some pre-saved templates for things like metric designs, inch designs, things like pre-saved templates with user parameters that are predefined. So we've done an API video on this where we brought in things like draft angle and wall thickness and rib thickness, and we pulled those in to a standard design as sort of a template. That is where I would love to see some more effort, being able to predefine things like this. We can do it with drawing templates, right? We can predefine drawing templates, so when we're creating a drawing from a design, we can use those templates. But we don't have anything on the design side. We always have to go in and say, change the document settings if we need a different unit system, or go in and manually add user parameters if we need to have things like draft angle and wall thickness, or some of those parameters. So the core of that functionality is there, with the ability to import parameters that you saved, or again, use the API that we worked on in that video. But just a little bit of more effort there, I think, would go a long way to making Fusion just a bit more flexible. All right, there are some small but notable improvements that I do want to mention. And so first up is the measure tool. Now, the measure tool, I use it all the time. And historically, if I needed to measure the distance between one rib and two ribs, I would have to clear out the selection and come back and go down to the next one, or clear the selection here. What we have the ability to do now is actually deselect and then make a new selection. While that seems pretty minor, that's actually huge, because that saves a lot. Because sometimes when you're measuring, you don't really have white space to click on, and you got to clear the selection and you got to come back here. Now, you can also just click on things and see it in the UI down here. So again, minimum distance here, and we could deselect it and do it here and see the minimum distance. So that is possible, but we now have the ability to do that directly in the measure dialog. So I think that, again, small but notable improvements. The next thing, let's hop into a sketch real quick. Whenever we have sketch profiles and we have a line that is defined as a center line, by default, Fusion knows if we go to do a revolve, it knows to select that axis as the center line profile. And so basically, it knows we've got a single profile. It knows we have a line defined as a center line. It says, okay, I know what to do with all this. The change that we have now is, if you have a center line defined, it now uses it as the default mirror line. So again, small but notable improvement, because what you would have to do if this was a normal construction line, for example, is you'd have to come over here, select this, select that, and then OK it. And while it's only 2 clicks, not being able to tab to the dialog box and having to, go through just a couple of extra clicks, if you use mirror a lot, or if you use these tools a lot, those little differences add up to quite a bit. I much prefer updates like this, or updates to the measure tool, than the Autodesk Assistant being able to create a render-like image. To me, these are the things that improve my daily workflow and help me out long term. Actually, while we're in a sketch, there's another small but notable improvement. Text. Ever since we got parametric text, which I think is a great option, it is honestly the most annoying thing to use, because 99% of the time I don't need parametric text, but you now have to have the quotations. It's now linked to a parameter. And so I would love if there was a checkbox to make text parametric or not, and then we kind of do away with all this formatting nonsense that we have. Because now, like, if you want to add a second line, I think you need to do like plus and then use a quote. I don't even know if this is going to work, honestly. Yeah, okay. So you see, you have to treat it like it's a formula in order to get, and yeah, I spelled bottom wrong, in order to get this to work. That's not the reason for this. The reason for this is because now with text, we can reuse the text line, and basically we can associate new text with it. Bottom. All right. And so what happened in the past is, if you used a selection for text on a line, you could only use it once. Now we have the ability to use it twice. So again, small but notable update. I would love the ability to not have parametric text, to have it as an option. That would go, honestly, that would go much further for me than the ability to reuse that line. But again, maybe that's just me. While we're talking about text, while we're talking about sketches, I'll just make a quick note. If you use edit in place, edit in place has been gradually getting more and more access to certain tools. And so now edit in place has the ability to modify things like isoparametric curves. And so isoparametric curves are something that we saw come up in the last update. So those curves, we talked about them in that last update video. It now has access to isoparametric curves. So again, this is typically what we see with Fusion updates. If something new gets added, the next release, you'll see it's added to configurations or it's added to edit in place or something like that. So again, small but notable. If you use it, it's nice to have. Probably 99% of you don't use edit in place with isoparametric curves, so it's probably never an issue. There also have been some changes for things like constraints. With constraint sets, you can select the components. I don't think that was available in the last update. Now you can right click on the constraint set and select both components pretty easily. That can be pretty nice if you are trying to select the components that are involved in that. The reason for that is because then you can do things like isolate them quickly and unisolate them. So again, small but notable changes that do actually have probably a more sizable impact on workflows. The last thing I'll say is there's supposed to be some improvements to sketch stability. This one is one that I'm just going to have to find out and see. And so what historically happens is sometimes when you start a new line and you click too fast, you end up getting smaller line segments. And I'm talking about really small like this. And what happens is those get lost because they're basically really small and you can't tell that they're there. And so you can see there's like a little extra line in there. And so what happens is those little lines become problems downstream. They become problems later on. And so what's supposed to have changed, and again, I don't know if it has or not because I have to use the software for a while to figure it out, is those little lines are supposed to start getting filtered out. If that is actually happening, that saves me a lot of headache because those little lines are a pain. We've talked about this in the past. There are some command line tools to find things like under constrained entities that can find some of that stuff. Hopefully the filtering out is using that functionality and deleting it or combining the endpoints or whatever. I don't really know. But fingers crossed that is actually an improvement. The last thing that I'll mention is the split face tool. This now has a chain selection option. So this historically has not been able to grab a full chain. You had to work your way around. That could be a pain, but now that we've got chain selection, that is helpful. That does not work for my testing, it does not work on edges on a solid or a surface. It works on sketches. And so again, improvement, nice to have, definitely beneficial. I'll just have to see how beneficial it becomes the longer we use it. So if you have any questions on this stuff, please leave a comment and let me know. You can always go to the help menu and go to what's new. That'll take you directly to the product update page. I'll also leave a link to this in the description of the video. As noted, we didn't cover everything. In these updates, we don't cover everything. We only cover what I feel is like the most important or sometimes the most annoying, like the home tab for me. But any questions or comments on any of that or anything else in the what's new, I can do my best to try to answer it. Any questions or comments at all, just leave them in the video. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.